So what you need to do branch weaving are not much actually. You need a pair of scissors, a fork for beating down your threads, and some very strong yarn or string. I'm using some mercerized cotton yarn here, but you could also use wool. This is beautiful hand-dyed wool that I got from the Isle of Skye. Beautiful business there who go out foraging for plants and then they dye the wool themselves. And this is some yarn that I've spun myself and I've plied, so it's really super strong. So these are for your warp threads. The most important thing is that you get really strong string or yarn for those threads. But you can use anything. You'll also need a darning needle with a wide eye as well. And you might, but not always, need a pair of secateurs just for trimming down your branches. And then finally, you will need some actual branches themselves for you to do your weaving on. So I'm just going to show you a few that I've foraged for this week in our local woodland. And this one, you can see it's quite spindly and it's quite fragile and it bends quite a bit, and there's quite a few V's on it as well. I would use this for weaving, but I wouldn't use it if I was a beginner, because as I'll explain in a bit, when you put the warp threads on, they can move around a little bit if they're spindly like this. Also, with it having lots of bits to it, you might want to sort of trim it down a little bit with your secateurs to get it to the shape that you want. So we can see now it's taking shape a little bit. I've got a V here and a V here and potentially a V here, although that's really fragile. So that's one type of stick that you could use. Also, when I was foraging in the woodland, I picked this one up. I really like this because it's got lichen on it. You see that beautiful yellow bloom there, and I would be tempted to actually leave that in. However, I think this has been on the woodland floor for quite a while because it's quite fragile. I'm going to give it a squeeze, and as I suspected, can you see it snapped? So when you go out walking, when you're foraging for these branches for the weaving, always do that snap test, because you don't want to get halfway through your weaving and that goes, you're going to lose all your work. So that's something to be aware of. I did that deliberately to show you. Now this is lovely. I found this on the floor. There was quite a lot of these around, and I think someone had been around cutting down some of the branches off the tree, and I liked this. I like the V on it, and it's very knobbly. I think it might be elder, but it's very, can you see, it's very springy. If you look at the other end, you can just see round the bottom here. Let's just see if we can get a bit more focus on that for you so you can see it better. It's quite green, so that's telling me that this is probably what's known as green wood or very new wood. And I'd be inclined to keep this and season it a little bit so that it goes hard, because what you don't want is weaving onto something that's then in a few weeks time it will shrink, and then your weaving in the middle will move around and it won't be as good as when you first made it. This one here, I love this because it looks like an antler, so it's really big. I'm not going to use this as my demo piece today because you simply won't be able to see it. Let's just fix that focus a bit better. So when I found this, it was covered in bark, so you can see a little bit of it I've left on here, and it was really fragile and it was coming off, so I actually took all of the bark off, and I've started to sand this down. I haven't quite finished with it. I really love it because, can you see here, it's got a V here, it's got a V shape here, and then right at the bottom another one, so I could do 3 weavings on that one branch. Beautiful piece that. And it's really strong, so when I do that snap test, that's not going anywhere. It's nicely seasoned and it's ready to go. This is the piece that I'm going to be using today. Really like this piece here because it's got some of the wood missing. It's got a story to tell, and It's got a nice curve shape around here and a nice straight edge on there. So this lovely piece we've got here, what I would do first of all, once it's nice and hard and ready to go, I'd look over my piece and look to see if there's any bumps that might get in the way when I'm putting my warp threads on. This one's actually okay, but sometimes you can get big bumps sticking out like this one on the inside, and you might need to just trim it down a little bit. So I've got this is my precious knife that I use for carving. This is a Swedish carving knife. Nobody's allowed to use it but me. And what I would do is I would go along, I mean this is a tiny bump and I wouldn't worry too much, but I'd just go along and just trim those off with the back of my knife. You could use a kitchen knife or a Stanley knife, craft knife, that would work just as well. And just get some of these knobbles down that might get in the way of the warp threads. And then once I've done that, let's just move all that debris out of the way. I would then perhaps give it a light sand as well, just to get rid of any potential splinters that might be in the way. And then that's good to go. Obviously, if you're wanting to retain some of the integrity like the lichen I showed you earlier, then you wouldn't want to sand that off. So there's our piece nice and ready. And the next thing we're going to do is put the warp threads on. So I'm going to use this cotton thread. And I'm going to do, first of all, a sliding knot. So I'm going to put this yarn over my hand so it goes around my thumb and around my index finger, and then I'm going to put my fingers around the outside and then bring that loop over the top so that we've made a sliding knot, and then that will go over one of the arms of the V of the branch, and then I can pull that really tight so it locks into position. There's nothing to stop you from just wrapping it around and tying a knot, but there is a tendency for it to come loose, so you might need someone to just hold on to it while you make the second part of your knot. So what I'm going to do now is just tie a proper knot on that now. Let's go around the back as well one more time. Just to hold that in position. There we go. And that tail end there, I'm just going to shorten it a little bit. But I'm going to leave it dangling because I'm going to weave that in as we go along. Okay. Now the next thing we're going to do is start making the warp threads. Now you could, or you might even see if you go online, people just doing that, just wrapping it around and around and around like that. I don't do that because what happens is they start to slide. Can you see what's happened? And they've all moved down. So I found a way of securing it so that doesn't happen. Okay, so there we are. We've got it tied off here. I'm going to go to the other side and I'm going to wrap it round a couple of times, and I'm just going to go over the top of where I've just started that wrap. It's almost like a cross, can you see? And then I'm going to go round to the back again, so I've wrapped it round twice, and then I'm going to go through the middle and over, and then I'm going to wrap it around twice again, so over, almost like making a cross, around again, and I'm going to go through the middle and up and over the top. through the middle and over the top. I'm going to make it quite wide between them. I wouldn't normally do this, but the reason I'm doing that is so that you can see more clearly under the camera what I'm actually doing. I'm just going to pause there for a moment. And what I'm doing here is almost like a figure of 8 action. So I'm going to turn it round so you can look down. Let me just line that up a little bit. And can you see it's like a number 8? I'm going around in a figure of 8. And the reason for that is that when we come to do the weaving will sit in between the 2 arms of the V. Whereas if you wrapped it just around and around, you would find that your work has a tendency either to be too proud forward or a little bit further backwards. But what I'm trying to do is tease the weaving into the middle by doing this figure of 8 action. So I'm just going to do a few more of those wraps, and I'll slow down a little bit. So we're going round twice, back up through the middle, and then up and over the opposite arm, around again, back up through the middle, sometimes, did you see it then when I was just doing it, it was sliding, so you just need to perhaps hold it in place with your finger until you've got that wrap over there, over that strand. So back up through the middle, what we have here is almost like a zigzag sort of effect on the loom. I'm going to make this the last one so we can move on to the next bit. So I'm going to cut quite a long bit off, and then I'm going to wrap that around, and this time let's just move to put my hand underneath so you can see what I'm doing. I'm going to bring that yarn to the front, and can you see there's a loop there? And then I'm going to wrap that tail around and then through that loop, and that's made half a knot. I'm going to do that one more time. I'm making a loop, wrapping that tail end around, and then bringing it through that loop, and we've got a nice secure knot there. Okay, so what we've got now is our warp threads on in a zigzag kind of way, and they're nice and secure because we've wrapped it round to stop it from sliding, and that's now ready to be used as a weaving loom. Okay, so I'm going to start with some of my hand spun wool. So when you're cutting your thread, try not to go anything longer than from the end of your hand to the tip of your shoulder. So it's a fairly short piece that I've got here, and I've threaded it onto a darning needle. And what we're going to do now is weaving. So the action of weaving is going under, over all of these threads here in sequence. So I'm going to start here. I'm going to go under and then over, under, over, under, over. I've got about halfway, and I'm going to give it a little bit of a pull, and I'm going to turn it around, and with this tail end here I'm going to tuck it in by doing the opposite of what I've just done. So remember, I went under and over, under, over. This time I'm going to go over, under, over, under and over. And the reason I'm doing this is to hide that tail end away. And I'm going to push that up to the edge there. So I'm going to carry on going all the way to the end. So we went under that one, so over, and then under, over, under, over, under, over, all the way to the end. This is where the fork comes in handy. So the fork can be used as what's known as a beater in weaving. So it pushes all your threads, these are your weft threads, all the way down. Also, if you give that end a pinch, you'll be able to pull that so it's nice and, oh, it's come out again, so I just need to beat that down one more time. And the trick is not to pull too tightly, because you don't want to, if you pull too tightly, you'll find that first thread will start moving inwards. Now we've got to the end, I'm going to do the opposite. So I've gone over that last one, I'm going to go around it, and this time go under, over. Pulling it but not too tight. Back to the end. You can beat it down again with your fork. These are quite wide, these threads, so I could probably use my fingers with this, but if you've got your warp threads fairly close together, the fork comes in really handy. Getting a little bit faster now. You could also, you don't have to have a darning needle either to do this. You could do it with your fingers. It's just that when you're using a darning needle, it makes it go a little bit quicker. It's almost like sewing. And doing this, it's quite meditative as well, because it's repetitive. And sometimes, if you've had a busy week, busy stressful week, doing something like this repetitive is really, really relaxing. Can you see how that's also fitting around the contour, that curved contour of that branch as well? It's just naturally sitting in there. So I'm just going to finish off by going just about halfway and then dropping the needle down to the back. Right, so this time I'm going to start weaving that arm, but I'm going to start on this side. So can you see here where I've dropped that tail at the back? I'm literally going to weave those last 2 stitches over the top of it. In fact, no, I'll start at the beginning. So I'm going over, under, all the way down to the bottom. But when I get to the bottom, I'm going to push it over to that side, and I'm going to mirror what we did on the opposite side. You'll notice also there's this tail here from where we ended, so I'm going to sit that all the way across the loom, and with that tail end I'm going to weave a little bit of that in the opposite direction. And then I can push that all the way up to that side. And this time I'm going to weave all the way back. So at the end, can you see here we've got that tail that we had when we started at the very beginning. So I'm going to just sit that over there and weave around that and that side. There we go. So I went over that one and under the last one, so this time I'm going over under all the way back to the beginning. I'm going to turn it around. Just going to do a couple more lines and then we'll change colour. This is the most tricky part of starting branch weaving, the actual setting up and doing the first few rows. Once you've done those first few rows, you'll notice that those warp threads that look like a zigzag to start with start straightening out a little bit, and you can see more clearly where to put your needle when you're weaving. See, now I've gone wrong here. Can you see I've gone over 2 somewhere and it's made it go wrong? So I'm going to just go back and undo that. It's good to make mistakes because you learn when you make mistakes. So I missed one just there. I went over 2. And then we're back in sequence now. And now I'm going to show you how to change colour. So I'm just going to go about halfway down the loom. Just turn it over and shorten that a little bit. I'm not going to cut it right up to the loom. I'm just going to cut it a little bit away from it, about 1 inch or 2 away. And then we're going to bring in the next colour. So I'm going to use this lovely red yarn that my dad spun on a drop spindle. So I'm just going to push that to the side with the fork. And I'm going to go back to the first side. So if we look at the back, that's where I ended, just about there. So I'm just going to go back a few stitches where I ended and just go over those again with the new thread. Leave about 1 inch of it dropping down behind. And then just carry on weaving. And adding in a new colour. So what I would do is, if I wanted that nice V shape, I would carry on going backwards and forwards on either side until I'd filled in the first few strands of the loom. So I'm just going to finish off with that one and move on to the next piece. So what you'll find is, as you're changing colour, you'll be getting lots of these strands at the back, and that's fine, we'll deal with that at the end. So I'm going to move on to the next piece now. So when you've built up the sides of your weaving, so you can see here there's quite a few different colour changes that I've had here, and I've mirrored it on that side. You don't have to do that, but I quite like doing that. And if I just push that, will beat those to one side, can you see? You can just see those are joining there, but I can open them a little bit and I might be able to get another colour in there, which is what I'm going to do next. Let's cut this down. I've done that one too long. So I'm going to pick up where I left off with my weaving here. So if I just turn that to the back, you can see that's where I ended with my last bit on that side. So I'm just going to put my finger there, turn it over, and what I'm going to do is just go back a few stitches and start weaving over the top of that. So I'm just bringing it in so there's about 1 inch of thread at the back. Turn it to the front and start weaving on top of that. Then get to the top and turn around and weave all the way back down. And now you can see that I'm getting right down into the bottom of this V. And what I'm going to do is open that up a little bit so I can go all the way to the bottom. It's quite tricky. There's not much room in there. And this time I'm going to turn it around, but I'm going to go all the way up the opposite side. So I turn it that way. Open it and then squeeze my needle in and weave up the opposite side. And then what you would do, you would continue weaving all the way down. Open it if you can, and you might just be able to get down to that strand there, or that one, not quite the end one. And eventually the bottom of this V will start closing up, so you need to stop short where it begins to close and keep going and going. You can change colour if you want to, but eventually you will end up with something like this. So we're nearly there now. So what we've got now is this weaving. We started off by weaving along the opposite sides until it became closed in the middle, and then I started to just weave that first line right down to the bottom, and then on the subsequent rows it kept going higher and higher. I couldn't get in anymore. I've changed colour as well, so I've just literally been going backwards and forwards almost around in a V shape. And now I'm just left with that tiny little gap at the top, which I'm going to fill in now. Next strand of wool. I'm just going to turn it over. I can see that I ended just there. So I'm just going to weave over that bit. And I think I can just about get in there. Might be able to make one more stitch down there. Yep. And then back up the opposite side. Getting really tight now. If I had the luxury of time, I'd probably go a little bit further down there, but I'm not doing it as tight as I ordinarily would. So I'm just going to finish this off so you can see how that's done. Okay, so I'm going to finish off now by turning it over, and I'm going to put my needle along these loops at the top here. So just through, give it a little bit of a tug. And I get my scissors and start snipping these ends off. So the back, it looks quite messy, although some people quite like that, so you could leave it if you wanted to. But what you can see here is that where we tied off at the beginning, just here, I've woven that tail end underneath, but we can now just give that a bit of a tug and pull it off. Be careful you don't cut your warp threads though. And the same with the top one. I've woven that a little bit of the way along. I can snip that one as well. And the same goes for the rest. You can snip those without any of your work coming undone, because what you've done with your comb or with your fingers, you've actually squished it down or beat it all together. And it's not like knitting. If you imagine if you knitted a jumper and you dropped a stitch or a thread, you'd have a ladder. That doesn't happen with weaving. So what you will get, if we go back to the original, once you've cut all those threads off, you get a stick with your weaving that looks the same on the front or the back, so you can then decide which way you want to hang your work. So that's the weaving done. But the next thing you want to do is you need to keep it preserved. So by the simple act of holding this, you will have oil in your hands, and that will naturally seep into your stick. But I've got here, this looks a little bit manky, but this is my little pot of wonder. So in here I've got a mix of beeswax and coconut oil, and then this bit of cloth here that's absolutely soaked with it. And I use this when I've made a crochet hook. I use this to rub all over the stick, just to condition it and to preserve it. Can you see as I'm doing that, it's actually bringing out the grain of the wood. In fact, if we get that antler, that one that looks like an antler, probably be able to see it better. So see how that brings out that lovely colour of the wood. You could use kitchen oil as well, something like olive oil or sunflower oil. I think that would work just as well, but I just find with the wax it actually stays on better, and also the natural oils in your hand will help. But look how lovely that's brought that wood up. So invest in a little bit of beeswax or coconut oil to condition your sticks. So just to finish off, I just wanted to show you what to do when things go wrong. So this one, believe it or not, was not what I intended. It went wrong. And the reason it went wrong was because when I was putting on my warp threads, I was pulling them a little bit tight at the top, and the two arms of the branch started to go inward a little bit. And as I started weaving, these warp threads then became unmanageable, and I just couldn't weave with them. So when I got to this point, I thought, what am I going to do with all these baggy warp threads here? So I decided to diversify by wrapping around it and going with what happens, you know, not saying to myself, oh, I've made a mistake. I said to myself, well, what can I do now? This wasn't what I expected, but what can I do to make this work? And that's what I did with that. The same happened with this one as well. So this is a stick. I picked this up from a place called Stonywell in Leicester, and it's a house that was built by Ernest Jimson, who was very well known in the arts and crafts movement. So this was in the grounds of that house, and it's a silver birch stick. So I picked that up and I thought, do you know what, I'm going to do some branch weaving on that, in keeping with the arts and crafts movement. And as I was weaving that one, you can see here I've used string, and I've used bits of fabric that I've torn up, and then I got so far, and where this, can you see where this junction goes round? It made a great big gap there that I just couldn't weave into. So what I've done here is almost like a dream catcher like weaving to fill in that gap. So I didn't see it as a mistake, I saw it as a happy accident. Also, if you can't find any V-shaped branches, this is something that I've done that my daughter's since stolen from me. So these are 3 pieces of driftwood, and what I've done here is I've lashed them together. I've used some scout knots to lash those together, and I've actually drilled some holes along here and added my warp threads through, because I didn't want them to go around it and hide the beauty of the wood. And what I've done here, I've woven bits of debris that I found on the beach in Norfolk nearby. So some of it's plant matter, some of it's fishing net. As I was doing it, the warp thread snapped there, but luckily I'd already woven in some fishing net, which is quite rigid, so I diversified, kept that one shorter and finished it off. So there's lots of possibilities of things that you can do, even if you can't find a V-shaped branch in the wood. So that's it for today. This is how you do branch weaving.